Intentional Communities, Lifestyles Based on Ideals. By Geoph Kozeny of Community Catalyst Project, San Francisco, California. Drawing on information from his visits to hundreds of communities across the continent, Geoph Kozeny gives an overview of the communities movement, not only its current state, but also how it has evolved and its prospects for the future. He points out the common bonds that link communities in spite of their diversity. Underscore 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 on. Today many people are questioning our society's values, and asking what gives meaning to life. They bemoan the loss of community, and are looking for ways to reintroduce community values into their lives. There are several options now available to the average person that satisfy at least the basic cravings. Many folks get involved with various civic or social change groups, others get more deeply involved in the activities of their church, still others create friendships and support networks in their neighborhoods. Those with strong motivation to live their values full-time often seek to join or create intentional communities. An intentional community is a group of people who have chosen to live together with a common purpose, working cooperatively to create a lifestyle that reflects their shared core values. The people may live together on a piece of rural land, in a suburban home, or in an urban neighborhood, and they may share a single residence or live in a cluster of dwellings. This definition spans a wide variety of groups, including, but not limited to, communes, student cooperatives, land co-ops, co-housing groups, monasteries and ashrams, and farming collectives. Although quite diverse in philosophy and lifestyle, each of these groups places a high priority on fostering a sense of community, a feeling of belonging and mutual support that is increasingly hard to find in mainstream Western society. Intentional communities are like people. You can categorize them based on certain distinguishing characteristics, but no two are ever identical. Differences among them, whether obvious or subtle, can be attributed to variations in philosophy, in mission or project emphasis, in behavioral norms, or in the personality and style of the leaders, if the group has identified leaders, and the individual members. Each group is somehow unique. A time-honored idea. Mainstream media typically promote the popular myth that shared living began with the hippie crash pads of the 60s and died with the arrival of yuppies in the late 70s and early 80s. The truth, however, is quite different. Today there are literally thousands of groups, with hundreds of thousands of members that live in intentional communities and extended families based on something other than blood ties. This type of living has been around for thousands of years, not just decades. It is well documented that early followers of Jesus banded together to live in a community of goods, simplifying their lives and sharing all that they owned. That tradition continues to this day, particularly through many inner-city Christian groups that live communally. These groups often pool resources and efforts in their ministry to the homeless, the poor, orphans, single parents, battered women, and otherwise neglected and oppressed minorities. Yet shared living goes back much farther than that, predating the development of agriculture many thousands of years ago. Early hunter-gatherers banded together in tribes, not just blood-related families, and depended on cooperation for their very survival. The advent of the isolated nuclear family is, in fact, a fairly recent phenomenon, having evolved primarily with the rise of industrialization, particularly the development of high-speed transportation. As transportation has become cheaper and faster, we've also witnessed an increase in transience, and the demise of the traditional neighborhood. Roots and realities. Although many contemporary community visions emphasize the creation of neighborhood and/or extended family ties, their philosophic roots are amazingly diverse. The range includes Christians, Quakers, and followers of Eastern religions, to 60s dropouts, anarchists, psychologists, artists, back to the land survivalists, and the list goes on. The scope of their primary values is equally broad, including ecology, equality, appropriate technology, self-sufficiency, right livelihood, humanist psychology, creativity, spirituality, meditation, yoga, and the pursuit of global peace. However, even among groups that base their philosophy on achieving a holistic view of the world, it would be quite surprising to discover a community that has achieved perfection amidst the fast-paced chaos of modern life. Communities draw their membership from society at large, and those members bring with them generations of social conditioning. The attitudes, behaviors, and institutions prevalent in the broader society, including the very things we seek alternatives to, are a significant part of our upbringing. Merely identifying a problem and expressing a desire to overcome it does not mean that we presently have the perspective or skills needed to transcend it. The problems we see out there in the mainstream: greed, dishonesty, excessive ego, lack of self-esteem, factionalism, inadequate resources, poor communication skills, you name it, all manage to find a significant role in alternative cultures as well. What is encouraging about many intentional communities is their tendency to be open to new ideas, their willingness to be tolerant of other approaches, and their commitment to live in a way that reflects their idealism. Although communities exist that are close-minded and bigoted, they're the exception, not the rule. More often than not, people who consciously choose to live in an intentional community also have parallel interests in ecology, personal growth, cooperation, and peaceful social transformation, pursuing the work necessary to change destructive attitudes and behaviors often taken for granted in the prevailing culture. Some common threads. Spirituality or religion, regardless of the specific sect or form, is probably the most common inspiration for launching a new community. Such groups bear a striking resemblance to their centuries-old predecessors in spite of current developments in technology, education, psychology, and theology. Many of North America's leading centers for the study of meditation and yoga have been established by intentional communities based on the teachings of spiritual masters from the Far East. Such centers include Kripalu in Massachusetts, Ananda Village in California, Satchidananda Ashram in Virginia, Ananda Marga in New York, and Maharishi University in Iowa. Each of these intentional communities serves a widely dispersed group of practitioners, including those who live in sister communities, and many who live out there in the wider society. Among secular communities, the inspiration is typically based on bold visions of creating a new social and economic order, establishing replicable models that will lead to the peaceful and ecological salvation of the planet. In some cases, however, secular groups may opt for isolation, seeking to escape the problems of the rest of the world by creating instead a life of self-sufficiency, simplicity, and serenity. Most members of intentional communities share a deep-felt concern about home, family, and neighborhood. Beyond the obvious purpose of creating an extended family environment for raising a family, communities create an environment of familiarity and trust sufficiently strong that doors can safely be left unlocked. In today's world of escalating crime, merely having that kind of security may be reason enough to join. Dozens of intentional communities, alarmed by rising student-teacher ratios and falling literacy rates in public schools, have opted to establish alternative schools and to form communities as a base of support for that type of education. Intentional communities comprise a sizable chunk of the membership of the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools, an organization of private schools, families, and individuals who share a commitment to create a new and empowering structure for education. Coalition members publish a quarterly newsletter and organize an annual spring conference for sharing resources and skills for social change. Other communities, usually smaller, have created rural homesteads where they can pursue homeschooling without fear of legal pressure from local school officials. State laws favorable to schooling at home have been promoted, and in some cases initiated, by members of intentional communities. Many communities that homeschool are active in national associations organized specifically to support parents' rights, promote topical networking, and to increase the nation's awareness of homeschooling as a viable educational option. Another popular issue these days is ecology. Over 90% of contemporary communities I visited, including those located in urban areas, practice recycling and composting. Many serve as model environments or teaching centers for sustainable agriculture and appropriate technology, and feature such concepts as permaculture, organic gardening, gray water systems, solar and wind power, and passive solar home design. Eco Home, a small shared household in Los Angeles, is an inspiring model of how to live ecologically in an urban environment. The Farm, a large cooperative community in rural Tennessee, has launched a wide range of environmentally focused projects, including the development of advanced radiation detection equipment, a solar electronics company, a solar car company, the Natural Rights Center, an environmental law project, and a publishing company that specializes in books about environmental issues, vegetarian cooking, natural health care, midwifery, Native Americans, children's stories, and pesticide-free gardening. In the late 1960s, a wave of new communities influenced by the anti-war movement, the sexual revolution, rock music, more permissive attitudes about drugs, and the popularization of Eastern religions sprung up to create cooperative lifestyles based on sexual liberation, born-again Christianity, and everything in between. In effect, these often naively idealistic utopian experiments functioned as a pressure cooker for personal and collective growth. Although many of the 60s groups folded during the creative but turbulent decade that followed, hundreds have survived into the 90s and are now thriving, having re-evaluated, restructured, and matured over the years. B.F. Skinner's book, Walden 2, a futurist novel based on his theories of behavioral psychology, inspired the creation of at least a dozen communal experiments. Los Horcones, one such community near Sonora, Mexico, is today one of the world's foremost experiments in behaviorist theory. A contemporary wave. Historically, participation in shared living communities has come in cycles. One major wave just ahead of the U.S. Civil War included Brook Farm, an educational experiment that attracted the likes of Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Other notable waves followed, one at the end of the last century, including some still existing single tax colonies, based on the economic philosophy of Henry George, one immediately preceding World War I, and another during the Great Depression. The last wave came out of the counterculture in the 60s, and now a new wave is beginning. This 1994 edition of the Communities Directory documents more than 50 new communities started during the past 5 years, and that's merely the tip of the iceberg. Also listed are more than 160 that have survived at least a decade, and 80 others that have been in existence for more than 2 decades. It is apparent that people dissatisfied with the gap between their ideals and reality will keep trying out new approaches until they find lifestyles that solve most of the problems they see in the dominant culture. History suggests that the process is endless. To paraphrase Karl Marx, today's solutions to yesterday's problems introduce new dynamics that become tomorrow's problems. An exciting feature of today's intentional communities movement is that its members are actively seeking to identify problems, working to find solutions, and trying to implement new insights in their daily lives. Many contemporary groups are exploring ways to achieve a true sense of community while maintaining a balance between privacy and cooperation, a concept quite compatible with values prevalent in mainstream society today. Perhaps by emphasizing common concerns rather than differences in our lifestyle choices, innovations will find their way more quickly across cultural lines. Although shared living does not appeal to everyone, history confirms again and again that ongoing social experiments inevitably lead to a variety of new social and technical innovations, developments that will eventually find many useful applications in other segments of society. It's hard to predict just when an intentional community will come up with something new that will be assimilated by mainstream culture. However, if social experimenting results in a product, a process, or a philosophy that makes life a little easier or a bit more fulfilling, then we'd be well advised to keep an open mind as we monitor the progress. About the author. Geoph Kozeny has been on the road since New Year's Day 1988, visiting over 250 intentional communities scattered across North America. He is himself a seasoned veteran of cooperative living, having lived in communities of one kind or another for over 20 years. Geoph is coordinator for the FIC Communities database, serves on the fellowship board, and is a regular columnist for Communities magazine. He volunteers full-time for the Community Catalyst Project, a non-profit organization he created to 1. Help communities get in touch with each other, 2. Provide technical assistance and support, 3. Offer referrals for seekers, and 4. Promote public awareness of community living as a viable lifestyle option. Geoph's primary educational tool is a slideshow he compiled, and regularly updates, to provide a representative overview of the backgrounds, philosophies, and lifestyles currently available in shared living communities. Another version of this overview of intentional communities has been published in Claude Whitmire's book, In the Company of Others, Jeremy Tarcher, San Francisco, 1993.